what about, can you get your sound in a drum booth?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I get my sound anywhere. It depends on when I say my sound or when you say my sound. It's, can you get the desired sound for the situation, for the song, for the record? Now, certain things are production decisions. When I go into a session, to reiterate, and I'm a side person, I don't dictate where the drums are going to set up, where, you know, it's up to the producer to say, you know, what, I can make anything sound like anything you want. So it's your choice to ask me how you know, you have to direct me on what you're looking for. If you're waiting for me to make that decision for you, well, now all of a sudden I'm a co-producer, because that's a
Okay.
production decision.
But
I'm
would
not going to make
you would rather be out
productions.
in the studio with the band, assuming they're playing live, than in a booth, right?
Not necessarily. Depends on what. No, because when you're in the booth, you still see everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you have to hear that. You have to hear a mix over the headphones as opposed to hearing them.
You're still hearing. You're still wearing headphones even when you're in the room.
Okay.
You're still wearing headphones. Yeah.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter.
There you go. That's why you get all the work.
Yeah.
So what about performing live versus studio? How do you approach that differently?
It depends on who I'm playing with. When you know, sometimes in the studio you might be a little bit more, a tad more restrained if you're making a certain type of record. It really depends on what the job calls for. Like for instance, a great example of is when you're playing with James Brown. James Brown is gonna have a tempo that's a certain way in the studio because he's making a record. But when he plays that same song live, it's going to be twice as fast, and it's going to have more sections and more stops and starts and things because he's putting on a live show.
Right.
So that's the same approach. You know, there's certain things happen live that don't happen in the studio, and that goes for the sound, for the tempos, for whatever. And then, of course, that's up to the band leader or arranger or musical director and where that's going to be.
But you're feeling the energy from the audience in a live situation that you're not in the studio. So that has to change things. That's another element.
Oh, absolutely. And but you know, in the studio, you also want to, you know, depending on who you're working with, you also want to project how this is going to hit people live when you play the same song. You know, so for instance,
I mean, sometimes the audience wants it to be exactly like the record. Sometimes they want it to be a whole new thing, right? I want it to be a whole new thing.
Yeah, see, and that's a very good point. Now I'll give you an example of that. I was in a band called the 24th Street Band in the late 70s, which later turned in basically to the world's most dangerous band, which was on Letterman. But it was Will Lee, Hiram Bullock, Clifford Carter, and myself. And we had a very big following in Japan. And we were studio players who played on a lot of records in New York. And we started to get a following up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And we were like the East Coast Toto. I used to joke without the songs, you know, because, you know, Toto, they just had hits. You know, they had hits. We didn't really have hits that made it to the prominent thing. We were a regional thing, but we had a good thing happening in like I said, in New York and in Japan. And it was really very important that the thing that we developed in Japan, that we still cherish to this day. But anyway, we were up on all the, you know, all the latest things. And so when the Eagles' Long Run came out, you know, we we got, we bought the record right away and dissected it, because obviously Hotel California was this great record. This is the follow-up record. Let's see what new ground they're breaking or whatever, and how we could better ourselves as a band by listening to this band and see what they're up to. So we get the record, we know the record, blah, blah, blah. The Eagles do the long run tour, and we go to Nassau Coliseum to see the Eagles. And we get our seats, and it's a pain in the butt to go out to Long Island to see, to go through all of this crap to get to see this thing, but we're gonna do it because it's the Eagles, and they're great. So we got to see what they're doing, how they do this. So we go, and I'll never forget this. It's very vivid in my mind. So we're sitting there, and they start to play, and it sounds great. In fact, it sounds so good. It sounds exactly like the record, okay? Now, Don Henley is singing all of the lead, most of the lead vocals, not all the lead vocals, obviously. Glenn Fry's a great singer, blah, 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 and Tim Schmidt had his little thing, one song. I can't tell you why. But Henley is doing the load, the singing. And he is there are 4 guitar players in the front line. And then Don behind the drums, but you can't really see Don because he's got these Ludwig Octoplus toms going across or whatever that kind of block him. And he's got a beard and the whole thing. So you can't really see. So you just hear this lead vocal, but you don't know where it's coming from, basically. And if you don't know that the drummer is singing lead, there's just this lead vocal. Right. And this band playing, you have no idea. And it sounds exactly like the record. And by 4 songs in, I'm looking around and saying, why the hell are we here? We have the record. There's nothing. This is a feat. Obviously, it sounds amazing. It's exactly like the record. There's no reason to be here. They did not change a single arrangement, a note. And, the harmonies were perfect. The playing was perfect. Everything was perfect from both records and everything. And it was just, it was like, I could have stayed home.
Yeah.
It wasn't like going to see James Brown or, Sly and the Family Stone or whatever, where, there are different arrangements. There was something to get the crowd involved, nothing like that. It was like just song after song after song, meticulously executed to perfection, and basically no reason to be there.
That's sad.
Absolutely no reason to be. And I learned, it was a big lesson. I learned never to, no matter how great something is, it was just like, nah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that.
It's a performance. I hope so. That's what I want.
Yeah. And granted, what they did, let me just be clear. What they did was phenomenal, because, now most people, when they try to replicate what they've done on a record, they're playing to a Pro Tools file, that's off stage. And so there's all this pre-recorded music being piped to the audience. The audience has no idea that most of the stuff they're hearing has already been pre-recorded, and is not being played from the musicians on the stage, okay? So there's all of that. That's why you see everybody with their little headphones on or their little earbuds, because it's not because they're trying to hear each other better, is they have to keep up with the pre-recorded stuff that's already there, right? This is prior to any of that shenanigans, that malarkey that's going on now. This is like just pure great musicianship. I got to give it to him. It was quite a feat. for them to execute at the level that they did. But they did.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
the Stones are like hit and miss.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to a Stones show, there's no guarantee it's going to be great. It
I
could be
know.
terrible. But then you could go to a Stones show, it could be incredible. Like one of the greatest things you've ever heard. One of my favorite things about going to a Stones show is the point of the show where the band kicks in the gear. Okay. They start out for a couple songs. Yeah, they sound great, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But then something happens. Maybe it's between Keith and Charlie or whatever, or whatever. But the band shifts in the gear and then they start clicking. And then bam, something else happens that you cannot predict. So you don't know what song is going to be the fourth song in where they hit their stride. Is it the second song? Is it like halftime? You don't know. So that's one of the things about going to a Stones show.
I would think what you did some work with Dylan though, right? I assume that Dylan would be really hard to predict. Not live, you didn't play with him live, but just working with him, right? That it seems like people show up.
It was so crazy that I declined to actually work with him live because they asked me to put a band together for him. And I put a band together for him. It was Danny Korchmar on guitar, Randy Jackson on bass, myself, and Bob. And we would play, and it didn't seem like Bob was actually as interested as I'd hoped he'd be. And I think Bob, for his own amusement, would do things like call a song and then playing in a different key than than it was supposed to be, that kind of thing, just testing us and all kinds of weird stuff. And in fact, what he really wanted was a more primitive sounding thing. In fact, I was putting my own band together at the time, and we rehearsed. Part of the deal I made was, can I use the studio, because he had block booked a studio. And so part of the deal I made was, can I use the remaining studio time to rehearse my band? Because, and our band was like kind of a new wave type of alternative. It was the beginning of that term, alternative band. And we were auditioning people, and he stayed at one of our rehearsals. He decided to stay. And he actually, this was the most bizarre thing. He actually sat on the stage while he didn't leave. So he just sat on the stage while we were rehearsing. And by the end of the thing, he said, I like this band. Why don't we just do this band? And I was like, yeah, but but I knew that this was the setup, because it wasn't going to work, because I just know so, and everything started to sound a little one-dimensional. So I went to the management, who was Elliot Roberts at the time. And I said, we need a little bit more variety. I think we need to add like an accordion player or a violinist or something. We need to add some more elements to the music to have more, just some more layers, more textures, because I could see the press in advance. I could see the reviews. Dylan has hotshot studio band and it's boring and everything. I just saw all of the views in my head. And so when we got to a certain point, I pulled out. I just said, I can't do this. So I got out. But I did work with Bob on a record around that time. And of course, one day during the rehearsals, actually,
Wait, which record?
Down in the Groove, I think his worst record I played on it.
That's the way you work, bro.
Yeah. During the rehearsals, we were, I was trying to motivate him, really. And so one day, Danny Korchmar, Randy Jackson, and I went down to Keith's house, his apartment, and we had lunch. And then we brought Keith back to the studio with us. And so that to try to light a fire under Bob, and because, Bob has an immense amount of respect for Keith. So even if he didn't have any respect for us, at least, he would have to play because Keith was there. So Keith came and he was, looking forward to playing with Bob and this band and everything. And it was freaking great. It was great because Bob had to snap out of it and had to be freaking play and sing and everything. And, and Keith was ready to play. So, it was, I wish this had been recorded, and maybe somebody did record it. Somebody may have a record of this somewhere, because I think somebody was taping something. It wasn't a multi-track, but I think there's a 2-track of this somewhere. And it was great. And everybody was very excited afterwards. And we thought, and then the thought was, okay, this is going to be great. This could be great. And then, so the next day they wanted an audience, of some people to sit in and listen and everything. So I get to the studio and I walk in, and Bob comes up to me and he says, "So who are you going to bring today, Steve? Prince?" And I'm like, oh man, okay. So that didn't go over too well. Yeah. And so that he made it very clear that wasn't his cup of tea. He didn't need any prodding. Yeah. So that was that. That was the end of that. That was the beginning of the. It was like, okay, so nothing is going to work in my mind. That's going to make me happy. It might be fine for him. He can get through the tour, and we can be lambasted. Kind of like when I read about what Levon Helm went through with the band, playing with Dylan in those beginning shows where the audience didn't want him to play electric, and he just kept doing it, and they were getting cans and bottles thrown at him and everything, and all kinds of stuff. And it was hell for Levon, who's a great singer and writer and player, and there was like no joy in Mudville for Levon during this thing, which is the reason why Levon left. He just couldn't deal with it. It was like crazy. And I really understood Levon's predicament after I went through this, which was an elementary school version of what he went through. Wow.
Yeah. When I've seen Dylan live, it seems like he just does his thing and the band is vamping behind him. Like they're just there and they're doing a groove or something, but it's not songs.
Well, he's got great bands. Right?
Yeah, he does. Absolutely.
He's got, the band he's had now, the rhythm section has been with him forever now, Yeah. And so he puts himself in a position where he has great musicians. But it can be kind of, I don't know, because I don't talk to them about that, because, you don't want to put somebody's thing in jeopardy. But I could see that there could be a frustrating element if there's no growth. I've seen Bob where he's playing. I saw the last show I saw Bob, actually, he played keyboard the whole night. He didn't play any guitar, which I thought was extremely strange. Because when you think of Bob Dylan, you think of him strumming a guitar. Now, of course, everybody's allowed to grow and change and do whatever they want. Bob Dylan can do whatever he wants. He's Bob Dylan. So, but you know, yeah, he was playing like electric keyboard, you know, the whole
You know,
night.
it's funny when his record Modern Times came out, he was interviewed in Rolling Stone, and he talked about modern music. Remember the name of his records, Modern Times. He said most modern music sounds atrocious. That was his word, his exact word. And then he said, including my own. Mm. And you know, there's a whole article about it. And I wrote a Stereophile as We See It about it, because I thought, but Bob Dylan can do whatever he wants in any studio with any musicians and do it over and over again if he needs to. And the fact that he can't get it done in a way that makes him enjoy it seems kind of ultimate and weird, you know, like in other words, he felt like he can't articulate what he wants the music to be.
Yeah, and who knows what the powers that be were pressuring him to sound a certain way, to do, you know, you're making records, you're talking about, you know, you got contracts, people are, you know, who knows what's in the contract, you know, incentives, you know, like if you don't sell X amount by boom, 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 then there's a decrease in, decrease in your royalty or whatever, or your option, you know, all these other kind of things that have nothing to do with music.
Of course.
And
but he must be pretty happy with his record company, Columbia, to stay with him for over 50 years, close to 60 now.
Well, I mean, when you become iconic, it's, you know, it's ridiculous for people to, you know, lose, you know, an artist of that ilk. I mean, when James Taylor and Paul Simon swapped, you know, Columbia for Warner's, when they both flipped, that was a big deal. You know, I mean, and I don't think either one of those companies wants to go through that again, because I don't think that was I mean, you know, I mean, it was like, you know, Motown losing Stevie Wonder, Motown losing the Four Tops, Motown losing Gladys Knight and the Pips. I mean, when Motown lost Gladys Knight and the Pips, I mean, and it's kind of like with Gladys Knight and the Pips, that was a real Tom Brady and the Buccaneers kind of moment where you know, it was like, okay, are they going to have hits outside of Motown? And actually, they got bigger when they left Motown. You know, come out the box with Midnight Train to Georgia. I mean, come on. You know, you don't get a bigger record than that, and that's not a Motown record. It's got a completely different sound. You know. Yeah.
I think we're good.
Cool.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. It's a pleasure.
My
you
pleasure.
Even made me like doing a Zoom interview. I'm not crazy about this format, but for you, absolutely.
Cool.